Hello, my friends, welcome back. Are you ready to finish and complete that cleaning of all our reviews? Let's do this. So just to recap on what we did so far, we made this for loop to, treat each review separately and clean each of them separately. And the first thing we did for each of these reviews was to replace all these non-letters by spaces. So basically all the punctuations by spaces. Then we turned all the letters into lowercase. So all these capital letters were turned into lowercase, and finally we splitted each review into its different words, because now we're about to proceed with stemming, which consists of simplifying each word by the root of the word. So for example, loved will be replaced by love, and I remind that it's very important to do this to optimize the dimensionality of the sparse matrix, which will be created through the next step with the bag of words model. Indeed, we will create that sparse matrix where each column is a word among all the different words of our different reviews after the cleaning, and therefore we need to simplify to the maximum, the different words that are going to be in this sparse matrix. So it's very, very important to apply stemming, and that's what we're about to do right now. All right, so remember, we imported this Porter stemmer class. That's exactly the class that will apply stemming. And so now the first thing we'll do is actually create an object of this class, which we will call PS for, Porter stemmer. And Porter stemmer is a particular type of stemming. You can check it out online, but that's basically the classic way of applying stemming. So PS, and now we will just call the class Porter stemmer. Perfect. Then adding some parentheses, and we don't have to enter any parameters. So let me actually scroll down a bit. All right, this will be easier for you. So Porter stemmer, now we have our object. So basically we have our tool to apply the stemming. And therefore, the next step will be exactly to apply stemming to this particular review we're dealing with right now inside this for loop, iterating all the reviews. So the way we're going to do this, because we have to apply stemming to each of the words inside this review, and the words have already been gathered separately by splitting this review. And therefore what we're going to do now is first, update our review again to become this time a list of all these separate words coming from the split, but stemmed, after we applied stemming on them. And so now the question is, how are we going to apply stemming to each of the words of the review? Well, we're going to do that, of course, with a single row for loop, as I like to call it, a for loop inside the same row, which is, usually applied to lists. And since now we actually have a list of the words in the reviews, thanks to this step 10 here, we can totally apply this single row for loop to iterate through all the words of the review and apply stemming to each of them. So let's actually start with this for loop. We're going to start with for, which will iterate through all the word, so word is just an iterative variable that will be equal to the different words of the review. So for word, then in review, right? Because review is now a list of different words. So it will iterate through all the different words of this review. And then we will add something which is probably something you will see for the first time if you're new to Python. But here, after a single row for loop, we can actually add a condition to omit some of the words we are iterating through. And according to you, what do we want to omit? What do we want not to include in the for loop? Well, that's of course, remember them, the stop words, right? Remember, we want to get rid of all the words that won't help us, or that won't help the machine learning model to understand whether a review is positive or negative. And these include all the articles like the, an, like an apple. We would just keep apple, for example. And even all the pronouns, like I, you, he, she, we, them, they. All these words give us absolutely no hint to figure out whether a review is positive or negative. And therefore we want to get rid of all these stop words. And that's again for the same purpose as stemming. It is to simplify the final sparse matrix, which will contain all the different words of all our reviews into columns. So we not only want to simplify the different versions of words or branches of words by only keeping their root, but also we want to get rid of all the stop words in order not to include them in the sparse matrix. And the way to do this, the way to omit these words when iterating through the different words in the review is by just adding if here and then a not. You will understand after I finish this. So let me just write it. If not word in the set of, and then I'm going to call the stop words module here, you know, this stop words here, from which I'm going to get all the English stop words, because, you know, our reviews are in English. And the way to do this is to add here words, and then in parentheses, because that's a function, and then in quote, English. Okay, so we clearly understand what this means. It means that if the word of the review, you know, we're dealing with right now in this for loop, if this word is not in the set, you know, the ensemble of all the English stop words, well, we will consider it in this for loop, meaning we will apply the stemming. However, if this word is in all these stop words list, well, we won't include it in this for loop, and therefore we won't apply the stemming to it, and therefore it won't be in the future sparse matrix. So you see the trick? Pretty cool, but so far we only have the for loop, and we don't know what we're going to do for each of these words, so we have to specify it now. And remember, we have to specify this before the for loop, because that's a single row for loop. And so what we're going to specify is, of course, that we want to apply the stemming to each of these words in the review, which are not the stop words. And so now the question is, how do we apply the stemming? Well, remember, we just created our Porter stemmer object. So we're going to start with this, calling our object, from which we're going to call a specific method, which is exactly the stem method that will apply the stemming. And since it is method, I'm adding some parentheses. And now I'm sure you guessed perfectly what's inside these parentheses, you know what must be inside. And that's, of course, our word, right? Our word on which we want to apply stemming. And now there you go, my friends. All this line of code, apply the stemming to all the words in your review, except the stop words, except all the non-relevant words that are not helpful to predict whether a review is positive or negative. Great, so that's a good step done. Now you know how to apply stemming to a review. And now, since we actually have our different words in the review into a list, we will just join them back together, because, you know, we actually had to do this in order to easily apply the stemming to all the words thanks to this for loop. But now that it's done, we will just join these words back together to get the original format of the review, you know, as a string. And therefore, the way to do this is to, well, you know, update our review variable again by setting it equal to, well, the junction of these different words after we applied stemming to them. And the way to do this is by calling the join function, which takes as input exactly, well, our list, you know, the review, which contains a list of the different words after stemming was applied to them. And however, if we join them this way, this will, you know, stick the words together, and we will end up with one word that makes no sense. So in order to separate these words by a space, you know, as in a classic string or text, well, we just need to add here in quotes, and then inside the quote we add a space, and then separating this with the join review by a dot. All right, so this will not only join your review, but also adding a space between each word of your review. All right, so good, now you know how to do this as well. And finally, we have a final step here. I'm sure you guess what it is. Otherwise, please press pause to just finish this cell implementation, but that's pretty obvious. All we did here was a transformation on a single review. And thanks to this for loop, now all the different reviews of our data set will be transformed and will be cleaned, and essentially will be simplified. But now, remember, we have this corpus here that was initialized as an empty list, and we want to add all these cleaned reviews into the corpus, because that's what will be expected by the method of the class that will create the bag of words model. And therefore, we must absolutely now add each review to the corpus, and the way to do this is by taking our corpus list and then call the append function to append indeed the review. And that's it, my friends. We are done with the cleaning of the text. So now we're going to execute this. You know, I think we deserve it. That was quite a long cell implementation. So let's do this. However, my runtime actually stopped, so I have to restart it by clicking, you know, runtime and then restart runtime. I will re-execute the two first cells and then this one, and we'll make sure that everything works correctly. All right, all good here. Let's do this. Let's first re-import the libraries. Done. Import the dataset. Done as well. And now let's see and let's hope we didn't make any mistake. Let's play this cell cleaning all the text, all the reviews, and it seems to be all good. And yes, this is what we're supposed to get. Perfect. So here it downloaded the stop words package from this path containing all the NLTK data, and also it's unzipped this zip file containing all the stop words. And perfect, and then of course it applied all this cleaning process to each of the reviews and adding them to the final corpus. Perfect, so now it is time for the next essential step when doing sentiment analysis. It will be to create the bag of words model, which will consist basically of creating this sparse matrix containing now all the words of the reviews after they were cleaned. So we will take all the different words of all the reviews, we will put them in different columns of the sparse matrix, and then that will be actually our future matrix of features, which we will combine to the dependent variable vector containing all the binary outcomes to train our future machine learning model, which will be the naive Bayes model, to learn the text and understand whether the reviews are positive or negative. So I can't wait to proceed to this next step, creating the bag of words model with you. And until then, enjoy machine learning.